Welcome to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano. It is a pleasure to join you on this Friday. As you hear the music, it's a little different. It's a little weird, which means we have weird questions for you. I'm filling in for Cy Kellett today. He's over in Oklahoma giving a few talks with, I think, Carlo and Joe. So I'm sure he's out there having a great time. But while he's having fun out there, we're going to have a great time here. So no calls today. We have all the questions we need on Weird Questions. Here with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, I love doing these shows. These are just so much fun. It just kind of gives you a step away from the normal routine.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun, and the Weird Question shows in particular are fun because you get to look at an unusual situation and extract the relevant principles and apply them in new ways.
Yeah, great. When I used to be a teacher, I would always tell my students to listen to Mysterious World because they would always ask me some weird questions, and then
Good
I would
teaching advice.
Thank you. And also these episodes because some of the questions they would ask me, I think would be very fitting for a show like this. So I told them, listen to that. I think a lot of the kids would really really enjoy it. So I don't know if they ever took me up on the offer, but I put it out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I guess we can just jump right in since there's plenty of questions. All right, let's start with Catholic Electrician asks, if I were stranded on a desert island with a woman and wanted to be married, could we exchange vows and consider ourselves married until we are rescued and finally have access to a priest?
As long as you've got witnesses, the answer is a clear yes. So hopefully it's not just you and the woman, but hopefully a couple of other people who could witness the marriage. Canon law, if that's the case, canon law expressly provides for this situation. It's in Canon 1116. Section 1 of the canon says, if a person competent to assist according to the norm of law, meaning assisted marriage, if a person competent to assist according to the norm of law cannot be present, that would be like your pastor or someone delegated by your pastor, like another priest or a deacon, or they can't be approached without grave inconvenience. Those who intend to enter into a true marriage, that would be the Catholic electrician and the woman he's talking about, can contract it validly and licitly before witnesses only, one, in danger of death, and two, outside of danger of death, provided it is prudently foreseen the situation will continue for a month. So Catholic electrician, if you're on an island with a woman and you want to get married, you can do it before witnesses only, as long as you don't foresee that you're likely to be rescued within the next month. Now, hopefully you are rescued within the next month anyway, but as long as it doesn't look like that's going to happen, you can go ahead and get married in front of witnesses only. Now, a further question could be, well, what if we don't have witnesses? And as far as I know, that procedure is not envisioned by the law. I can imagine a case for saying, look, we're going to be stranded here for years, and there were no witnesses. So given the circumstances that witnesses also were not available, this principle should still apply. And so I can imagine arguing that, but it would be less certain, because once you get back to civilization, assuming you do get back to civilization, you need to have a marriage tribunal look at it and see, can the principles be applied to situations where there are no witnesses because no one else was on the island? My suspicion is they would say, yes, that's fine, but it would involve an extra step. But if you've got witnesses, then they don't even have to look at it. It's expressly provided for.
So it would be considered technically a sacramental marriage because they are giving the sacrament to each other, right?
Yes, a sacramental marriage always exists between two baptized people. So if you're baptized and the woman is baptized, it's going to be a sacramental marriage. If it doesn't have to be a sacramental marriage, though. If you're baptized or she's baptized and the other is not, then it'll be a true natural marriage. That's why it says those who intend to enter a true marriage, not a sacramental marriage. It can be a true marriage without being a sacramental marriage.
Catholic electrician, hopefully that's helpful. Well, since we're talking about marriage, Jason has another question about a specific kind of marriage as well. Jason asks...
A little more specific this time.
Oh, yeah, very much so. So Jason asks, from the perspective of Catholic theology and canon law, how would the church view Adolf Hitler's marriage to Eva Braun? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, Eva Braun. Braun.
Conducted in a civil ceremony in the Führer bunker shortly before suicide. Specifically, how would factors like lack of sacramental intent, possible impediments, example, public notoriety, consent, coercion, psychological state, lack of openness to children, and the lack of Catholic form or emergency situation affects its validity or licity?
Licity.
There you go.
Yeah, so what Jason is referring to here is a marriage that did take place in the Führer bunker in Berlin in, I guess it was April of 1945, right at the end of World War II. The Russians had already invaded the city, Berlin, and Adolf Hitler and his cronies were holed up in this underground bunker called the Führer bunker. And one of the people that he was holed up with was his longtime mistress, Eva Braun. And he had had a number of girlfriends over the years, but she was his current one. And he had not married her during the course of the entire war. But since it was obvious they were just about to be overrun, he decided two things. One of them was, he made succession arrangements so someone else would take over the Third Reich after he was dead. But one of his decisions was, I'm going to kill myself. And he wanted his body to be burned so that it couldn't be used by the Russians as like a propaganda trophy. But before he wanted to die, he also wanted to make an honest woman out of Eva Braun. And so the plan was for the two of them to finally get married, and apparently they did that in, at least Jason is reporting, I'd have to verify this, but they did that in a civil ceremony. So Jason's asking about a variety of different factors and how they would affect the validity of the marriage or the licity, meaning the lawfulness of the marriage, because a marriage can be valid, it can be a true marriage, even if it's not conducted it with full compliance to the law. That's what licity is if something's fully compliant with the law, then it's licit, or it has licity. So one of the things that that Jason mentions is sacramental intent. Well, so that would be intending to enter a sacramental marriage. As you and I just covered in the previous question, you can have a true marriage without it being a sacrament. In the case of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, because both of them were baptized, if they have a marriage between them, it's going to be a sacramental marriage. So that wouldn't affect the situation. They would just automatically be a sacramental marriage if it's a valid marriage. Now, could a lack of sacramental intent invalidate the marriage? I can imagine a situation where that would be arguable. If you said, as part of your matrimonial consent, I take you as my wife only on the condition that this isn't a sacrament, then you would be, by a positive act of will, excluding an essential property of the marriage as it could exist between you and the other party, and thus you would not be consenting to a true marriage, because you're excluding an essential element of the only kind of marriage that can exist between you and the other person, given that you're both baptized. So I can imagine a hypothetical scenario where that could be relevant, but I have no evidence that either Hitler or Eva Braun had that kind of bizarre intent. in marrying each other. So that leads us down to the second of the factors that Jason names, which is public notoriety. This is where a scandal would be caused to the public by the marriage. Well, there's 2 points to make here. First one, this is not an impediment to marriage. Even if a marriage is known and is publicly notorious, that is just not an impediment. People have a right to marry unless they're prohibited from marriage. And the fact other people are going to, be outraged or something like that is not a check on your right to get married. So this is just not an impediment. Also, I'd point out this marriage was not publicly notorious because people didn't even know about it when it existed. Hitler and Eva Braun got married like within hours of the suicide, and it's not like they trumpeted over Berlin radio, the glorious Fuhrer has just married. Nobody knew about this who wasn't in the Fuhrer bunker, and so it wasn't publicly known and therefore could not be publicly notorious while the marriage was in existence. It, of course, ended with the suicide because death dissolves marriage. Then there's consent. And the presumption, so according to canon law, marriage enjoys the favor of the law. That means you presume that anything that looks like a marriage is a marriage unless you can prove it's not. So if you have two people who apparently gave consent to be married, you presume that that consent was legitimate, that it was sufficient for validity until you can prove it's not. So I'm not seeing an argument here for it being invalid. You need to introduce new evidence. Coercion. Coercion is something that will invalidate matrimonial consent, but I have no evidence that either Hitler nor Eva Braun was coerced into this marriage. In fact, they had both freely chosen to be in the Fuhrer bunker at this time, and so they had chosen to remain with each other, even given the grave situation they were in. And so that doesn't speak to the idea of one is coercing the other into being married. It looks like something they were agreed upon according to the historical record as far as I'm aware. Then we get to a more interesting one, which is Jason mentioned psychological state. Now, the way the law discusses this is it doesn't use psychological state. It uses the term due discretion. And there can be psychological conditions that interfere with consent via a lack of due discretion. And since Hitler was a murdering psychopath who I think also had tendencies towards, I don't know if he was diagnosable, but he was definitely a psychopath. And he may have been diagnosable as having manic depressive disorder or what's now called bipolar disorder. It's possible that one could say that that Hitler or Eva or both had a psychological condition that would have interfered with their ability to give valid consent, but merely making the accusation is not the same as documenting it. You need to be able to point to records from survivors of the Fuhrer bunker who could speak, or psychiatrists who could speak to their ability to give consent. But there is at least something there on this one, because we do have evidence of mental abnormalities in the case of Hitler. And anyone who would be Hitler's girlfriend, I'm saying there's a presumptive case for mental abnormalities there too. Then Jason names openness to children. Well, if we knew for a fact that they said, we will never have children, if God sends us any children, we're going to abort them or whatever like that, we're just never going to have children, and it was excluded by a positive act of will, then that would exclude an essential property of marriage and invalidate, but I don't know that was on the table, because in this situation, they're planning on dying in a day. Well, last I checked, human gestation takes between 9 and 10 months. So they are effectively on their deathbeds when they're contracting this marriage because they're planning on committing suicide. And you can get married on your deathbed. And not expect ever to have children. That doesn't mean you're excluding them by a positive act of the will. And it's just, I'm not going to have the opportunity to, because I'm going to die before we could have children. And this is, this is a similar situation with people who are like elderly and they remarry. Not that they're going to die immediately, but they're already infertile. And yet you can still, I'm just not going to have the opportunity to have children. I'm not excluding them. I'm just not going to be able to have them. And that's effectively the situation that Hitler and Eva Braun were in here. Now, also, I would mention that I don't know that if God had done a miracle and let him have a child, they might have been overjoyed by that. I mean, if I can imagine Hitler wanting a little Hitler Jr. to take over for him afterwards. So I don't know that they had a desire to exclude children. They just weren't expecting to have them. That leads us to the suicide itself as a factor, which Jason doesn't name. And this is a tricky one, but there is an impediment for marriage. It's called crimen, which is Latin for crime. If you have killed your previous spouse, then you can't get married. You're under an impediment for having killed your previous spouse. But Hitler had not killed a previous spouse, and neither had Eva Braun. The fact they're planning on killing themselves in the future is gravely immoral, but it's not a legal impediment. And so the only way I could see making that relevant is, does it impact their psychological ability to undertake the obligations of marriage? And I'm not seeing that it does, because this wasn't a suicide that was, that was done under the effects of a psychological condition. Their decision to kill themselves was cold and calculated, and does not appear to have been the product of mental illness. The reason they were killing themselves on this occasion was because the Russians had just invaded and Hitler didn't want to be taken captive. So it increases their moral responsibility for the suicide. It makes it worse, but it does not appear to have been a product of mental illness, and so it doesn't look like it's going to be an impediment for that reason. Then we have the last factor I would mention, which is form. Because under ordinary circumstances, Catholics need to get married either by their pastor or someone their pastor delegates, like another priest or a deacon. And this one's kind of interesting because, as we heard in the previous question, Canon 1116 says danger of death is one of the things that excuses. That's the first one. That's the first of the two conditions it mentions. Danger of death suffices if you can't reach your pastor or someone he's delegated, then you can get married in front of witnesses only. And my guess is, unless they had made other arrangements, neither Hitler nor Eva Braun could, while they're holed up in the Fuhrer bunker with the Russians invading the city, they probably could not have reached out and gotten Hitler or Eva's pastor to authorize their marriage because of communications difficulties across the city. And so it seems to me there would be a prima facie case, given that they're planning on killing themselves, so danger of death is present, that the way the law would read, it looks like this could be a valid marriage. Now, I don't know that it was. As I mentioned, there are grounds like their psychological state that could be used to argue it, but since marriage enjoys the favor of the law, it would require additional argumentation and evidence to get a firm ruling one way or another. But I would say the way the law is written, at least prima facie or on the surface of things, it looks like this marriage would also have a presumption of validity until such time as the contrary could be proven.
Jason, thanks for your question. Time for the break. When we come back, more weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1982. Mother Angelica presents Pope John Paul II with a model of EWTN's first satellite dish. "I have heard about you," the Pope said. "You do good work." A photo of the meeting and the Pope's words are of great help to the fledgling network.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Catholic Answers, we're taking on weird questions in this great first Friday of Advent. And back to the calls we go. Acacia K asks, how true is the law of attraction? And how much do we create our reality with our thoughts and feelings?
Okay, so the law of attraction is a proposal you normally hear about in New Age circles. The idea is you attract what you put out. So if you have thoughts about success and happiness and love and stuff, then you're going to attract success and happiness and love and so forth. And that it's just kind of a natural law, that the universe just kind of works this way. And it's often treated as a kind of paranormal thing. My difficulty with it is that, as it's commonly understood, I think is imprecise. I think there are elements of truth here, but simply slapping the label law of attraction on it and preaching it as this is how the universe works, it's like, no. We need to take a finer grained analysis here. So first kind of thing, well, what kind of thoughts are we talking about? Are you praying? If you're asking God, to send you success and love and happiness, God may do that. But that's not part of natural law. That's a voluntary act that God would perform as a favor to you. So it may be true that certain types of thoughts, like prayers to God, might result in the things you're looking for, but it's not an automatic law of nature. So that's why I would resist calling that the law of attraction. It's also possible that, and based on various experiments that have been done in parapsychology, that people may be able to have an influence on things in their environment, like they may be able to use, the technical term for it is psychokinesis. It's commonly glossed as mind over matter. We know angels have the ability to use their minds, because that's what they are, is created intellects that don't have bodies. They can use their minds to influence matter. And in the Middle Ages, the medieval philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and Blessed John Duns Scotus and so forth would use angelic intellects as models for human intellects and say, well, if an angel's a created intellect and it can do this, then a human intellect that just has a body also ought to be able to maybe do the same thing. I mean, maybe not to the same extent that an angel can. They're more powerful than us, but maybe it can do something along the same lines. And Thomas Aquinas actually believed in a form of what we would call psychokinesis. It was his explanation for the evil eye. The evil eye is a very widespread belief that goes back thousands of years and affects numerous cultures around the world, including ancient Israel. But the basic idea is that if someone looks at you with envy or hatred, it can cause you problems. That's why it's called the evil eye. And Aquinas thought that that he had a mechanism that would explain the evil eye, and he thought it was possible that in his words, when the soul is vehemently moved by hatred, then it can sort of infect your vision, and that effect can be transmitted to people, and that you're looking at with this, venomous hatred. And if you are fragile, like if you're elderly or if you're a small child, then it might be able to have an effect on you. But there's more to say about that, and we'll talk about it on the other side of the break.
All right, well, hang in there. We got plenty more weird questions for you. Just sit back and relax. We're not taking any questions today, so more questions here with Jimmy Akin.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, of morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
On Monday's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, our topic will be, was there a time when you knew Mary was praying for you? And now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano filling in for Cy Kellett today on a Weird Questions Day. Like I said, no calls today, so just sit back, relax, drink some hot chocolate or a nice cold beverage if you're here in San Diego. It's not that cold here. So you were in the middle of answering Acacia's question on the law of attraction, Jimmy.
Yeah, so I mentioned the possibility. I said I don't like the term law of attraction. I think it's an oversimplification, but there are some possible elements of truth that people lump into it. Like if you're using your thoughts to pray to God, he may give you blessings. So, but just that shouldn't be described as the law of attraction. Then I mentioned that parapsychologists have some evidence for what's called psychokinesis or mind over matter. And there have been doctors of the church like Pope St. Gregory the Great and St. Thomas Aquinas who believed in what we would today call psychokinesis. I mentioned that Aquinas believed it was the explanation for the evil eye. But one of the things that parapsychologists have found is that at least in most circumstances, if psychokinesis exists, it's weak in humans. We are not powerful psychokinetics like angels are. And so, so if there is an effect, it's in most circumstances, it's not going to be a very big one. There's also another, as I was thinking about it over the break, there's another proposal from parapsychology that could have a bearing here. There's there's been a substantial amount of evidence that has been accumulated in the last few decades that psychic abilities may exist in the general population, that it's not that there are certain gifted individuals who have ESP or psychokinesis. Those are two different things. But that everybody has these abilities, and in fact, everybody is using them all the time. This is a theory that's been proposed for, I guess, about 25 years, going on 25 years, by a researcher named James Carpenter. And he proposes that all organisms, not just all humans, but all organisms actually have constant access to psychic information, and they use that to help navigate their environment. So, like if you're walking out through the jungle and there's a lion about to leap out, and eat you, you might just take a different path without even realizing why you decided to walk in the direction you did, because it's all processed subconsciously. And there's been evidence. I mean, Acacia didn't ask this, but if you want, I can always tell you about the experiments. But there have actually been experiments done to investigate this possibility, and they've obtained some positive evidence. Fortunately, none of those experiments involved lions eating people, but that's something that would be unethical, and an institutional review board is not going to approve that kind of experiment. But it's possible that when we set conscious goals, like I want to make more money, let's say, that goal could be absorbed by our subconscious, which then might use, under first sight theory, it might use its access to, let's say, ESP information to try to help guide us into situations where we'd have opportunities to make more money, like hearing about and paying attention to an opportunity that might lead to a better job. So this would be a paranormal way for something like the law of attraction to function, but I don't like it generalizing this and declaring it, this is definitely the way it works. It's the law of attraction. We don't have evidence supporting that. Also, who says any of this has to be paranormal? Because just there can be purely natural reasons. If you are a happy person and you act happy and you act friendly, that's going to itself generate more opportunities for you, just on purely natural grounds. So as opposed to if you're mean and cranky and are hard to get along with. So there is a sense, definitely, in which your thoughts can influence the outcomes you encounter, but it may not involve God directly doing a miracle. It may not involve anything paranormal. It may just be you're adopting the attitude you need to succeed in business or in love or in whatever, and it's a purely natural effect that, oh, hey, this person's friendly, I think I'll cooperate with them more. Or, oh, hey, this person seems interested in me, maybe I'll pursue a romantic relationship with them, or things like that. It may be purely natural. And so even though I can't 100% rule this out, and there are some elements of possible truth here, I think it is a mistake to look at these different things and bundle them up and call it a law of attraction. That just goes beyond the data we have.
Acacia, thanks for your question. That was a nice and thorough answer that you have there. Let's go over to Just Some Trad asks, Here's a weird one. We know that demons can possess people and animals. But can demons possess creatures smaller than this, say parasites, bacteria, and viruses? Given the overwhelming role that the gut microbiome plays in mood, emotions, cravings, etc., it would seem advantageous for a demon to possess these smaller creatures and manipulate man via biochemical means if they couldn't possess them directly. If this is possible, would this be the case of possession or oppression? Additionally, might this be the reason that some demons can only be cast out by fasting, i.e. fasting radically changes the gut microbiome, and perhaps the creature they are possessing are killed off by the process of fasting?
Okay, so I want to compliment Just Some Trad for thinking through these questions and for even knowing about what the gut microbiome is. This is something that's only been gaining attention in the last few years, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. But basically, humans are giant germ condominiums. There are more germs in our bodies than there are our own cells. And a lot of these germs are in our gut, which is why they're called, now bios is Greek for life, mikros, it means small. So the gut microbiome is the tiny creatures that live in your gut, and there's lots of them, and they do affect health. They're beneficial and harmful ones. They affect how you digest food. In fact, humans are symbiotes with our gut microbiome. It can't survive without us poking food down for it to digest, and we couldn't survive without it helping us digest that food. So humans are actually symbiotes, and if it turns out that if you change the gut bacteria that we have, it can have both positive and negative health consequences. So I compliment Just Some Trad for knowing about this and trying to think it through. So let me think it through with you. We do have evidence for angels having the ability to control microbes. This evidence is found in the Old Testament, where at one point David conducts a census when he's not supposed to. And God gives him an option. He says, you can have 3 years of this, or 3 months of this, or 3 days of punishment from the Lord. And he says, well, at least God's merciful. My enemies aren't, so let me fall into the hands of the Lord. So he picks the third option for 3 days of punishment from God. And in response, God sends a plague into the land, but the plague for 3 days. But the plague is administered by an angel. And at a certain point, as the plague is breaking out, the angel is getting ready, and David has an apparition of the angel. He can see it, and he sees the angel's about to strike, and he offers a sacrifice to God to say he's sorry for what he did, and God stays the angel's hand, so the plague stops. And so today, now they didn't know this in David's day, but today we know that that plagues are mediated or caused by microorganisms, by germs and viruses. And so whatever caused this plague, whether it was a bacterium or whether it was a virus or whatever it may have been, an angel seems to be in charge of what's happening with it. And so that would suggest that angels can control microscopic organisms. And if good angels can do that, bad angels can do it too. So we have evidence for demons being able to use microscopic organisms. Now, does that mean possess them? Because you can affect an organism's behavior without possessing it. I mean, my family kept cattle for years and years and years, and we could make the cattle go into this field or that field to direct them where they needed to be grazed. We could even take them down to the slaughterhouse and get meat for a year, which we also did. So we could make the cattle go where we wanted, but we never possessed the cattle. So merely because you can control an animal doesn't mean that you can possess it. However, since demons can possess humans, I would assume, and we know they can also control microorganisms, I would assume they could possess the microorganism too. That could be the means of control they're using. So I don't have any problem with that. Just Some Trad then asks, could this be, in what category would we put this? Would it be infestation or something? And the answer is yes. The demons, even though it might look identical, or if it were a human that the demon was affecting, we might call it possession. That term tends to be restricted to when a demon is in control of a human. If the demon is in control of something else, we don't call it possession, we call it infestation. And so if a demon gets, they can infest a place, or an object, but also when animals are under the influence of a demon, we call that an infestation rather than a possession. At least that's how the terminology is involved. So I don't see a reason why we couldn't say demons could infest microbes. A microbe is just a tiny organism. It could be a bacterium, could be a virus. So yeah, this would be infestation. In fact, you could argue it's a kind of double infestation, because if a demon is affecting the organisms in your gut microbiome, well, it's infesting the microbes, and the microbes are infesting you. So it could be a kind of double infestation. However, there's a different term that gets used in connection with humans when demons affect their bodies, and that term is vexation. So it would be more proper to say the demon is infesting the microbes and it thus causing vexation to you, the human, by creating whatever kinds of problems the microbes are causing for you. So that's how the classical language in demonology would tend to express all this. Just Some Trad then asks, could this be the reason why Jesus said that some types of demons can only be expelled with prayer and fasting, that ordinary exorcistic rituals aren't enough in some cases? And I think it's an interesting suggestion, but I don't think it fits the data. When Jesus says this type of demon, and he does this right after the Mount of Transfiguration. He comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration and with, the disciples he took up, but he also left some disciples below. And when he comes back down, he finds out they've been trying to cast out a demon from a little boy that has been vexed. He is possessed, but he's also been vexed with epilepsy. And they can't drive it out, and so Jesus drives it out, and they say, why couldn't we do that? And he says, this kind only comes out with prayer and fasting. Well, you'll notice that fasting, which was understood as a spiritual practice in ancient Israel, is paired with prayer, which is unambiguously a spiritual practice. And so that would suggest that the governing rubric of why some of these demons require fasting is because they require extra spiritual efforts beyond just telling them to get out. And so it doesn't seem to be that you're changing your gut microbiome by fasting. It seems to be you're doing extra spiritual practices. So I think that just Some Trad has raised a very interesting question, and I want to compliment him for thinking it through. But on that last point, I would say my suspicion is the reason fasting works is because it's a spiritual practice, not because it changes your gut microbiome.
Fascinating. Just Some Trad, yeah, kudos on a great question there. It's something you just wouldn't think of. The gut microbiome being possessed. Who would have thought? All right, with that, we're going to go to the final break for the hour. And when we come back, more weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, We train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
You know, we talk story with each of our very unique guests for the whole hour so that you can go deep with us as you yourself pursue your own story of heroic virtue and as you pursue intimacy with God.
The Bear Wozniak Adventure, Saturday night, 6 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
And the hour is just flying by. And because of that, we're going to go back to the back to the questions because there's no calls today. King Tardigrade asks, is
nice name, by the way. King Tardigrade, that's good.
Yeah, when I first saw an image of one of those things, I thought it was something out of sci-fi. I really didn't think it was real.
Well, the tardigrades are, so for people who may not know, tardigrades, also known as water bears, among other names, are microscopic organisms. And so when you blow them up, they look kind of like a cross between a bear and a caterpillar. And they are insanely hard to kill. They really are masters at survival. And they do look pretty science fiction-y. In fact, they've even appeared in science fiction. Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, which ended up being a terrible show that I stopped watching, had tardigrade, had monster-sized, bear-sized tardigrades in it.
No way. I also heard that they're can potentially live in space. Is that true?
Yeah. They are extremophiles. They can live under a wide variety of conditions that would kill other organisms.
Wow. Fascinating. All right, King Tardigrade, I hope you're not the size of an actual bear and are not actually a tardigrade. But with that, your question is bilocation cloning, time travel, or doppelgängering, like something that's not the bilocated person taking the form of a person, like an angel or something? And the first and second example, what's going on there with the soul there? Is it two of the same soul in two places, or two bodies, one soul? Is that two different people? What happened when one of them goes away? What is going on?
Okay, so I guess the best way to approach this question, first I need to explain what bilocation is, and that's when a thing, typically a person, appears in more than one place at a time. That's the classic understanding because, bi means two and location means location. So bilocation means two locations. And so if an object or person more normally is appearing in two locations at the same time, then it's bilocating. The question is what explains this phenomenon? And King Tardigrade names several things that could explain it, like he mentions, for example, time travel. That, if let's say, okay, today is December 5th, but then let's suppose tomorrow I get in my TARDIS and come back to today, well, then I could appear in two places at once due to time travel. So that's a possible explanation. I don't have any evidence for that being the actual explanation of any known cases of bilocation. The next thing I ought to mention is it seems that bilocation is probably, also he mentioned cloning. Currently, we don't have cloning technology, and even then even if we did, we don't have the ability to age up the clone to where they could impersonate you. So I don't have good evidence for that, except in cases of identical twins, because identical twins are genetic clones of each other. And you could see, and if you didn't know someone has an identical twin, you could seemingly see that person in two different locations and think, how can John be both, at the mall and at the park at the same time if you just went from the mall to the park? Well, in that case, the apparent bilocation would be explained by natural cloning, which is what led to, the two identical twins. So I can't imagine that being an explanation for some cases of apparent bilocation. But it seems that the term bilocation actually covers a variety of different phenomena. I just mentioned a natural explanation. Identical twins. Okay, that's one, but that's purely natural. There are others that have different explanations. I did, if you, King Tardigrade, if you want more information on this, and I'll give you more now, but if you want a deep dive, check out episode 212 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's at mysterious.fm/212. You could also just Google Jimmy Akin bilocation and look under videos, and it should come up. But I go through different kinds of bilocation in that. Now, you mentioned doppelgängering, and that's a term not everyone's going to be familiar with. It comes from German. Doppelgänger, if I were to translate it literally into English, it means double goer. And so your doppelganger is a person who looks like you. And it could be that, doppelgangers are responsible for some instances of bilocation. The question is, how do we explain the doppelgangers? Because if you explain one unknown with another unknown, it doesn't really advance the discussion. Well, I think many cases of doppelgangers are likely purely natural. And I even have personal experience that I would appeal to in that regard. I used to live in Southern California, in San Diego, and I knew all these people in Southern California, like, for example, in the local dance community there. And then I moved back to Arkansas, to my hometown, and I would repeatedly be in the supermarket and suddenly see someone I knew. And it's like, how could this person be here? They're in San Diego. Well, when I look closer, it wasn't really the person I knew in San Diego. It was someone who looked similar to them. And so I think most cases of doppelgangers are it's just someone who looks similar. And if you look carefully, you'll see it's not really the same person. So I think a lot of doppelgangers, and thus some cases of bilocation, have purely natural explanations, but not necessarily all of them. There are, now, another thing that King Tardigrade mentions as a possibility is an angel looking like somebody. And there's actually some traction. It's not strong evidence, but there's some traction for this in biblical studies, because there's an incident, it's in Acts chapter 12, where Peter has just been arrested. This is just after like Passover of AD 43. And King Herod Agrippa I has executed James, son of Zebedee, and he sees this pleases the Jewish authorities, so he arrests Peter and is going to put him to death for Passover 2. But an angel shows up while Peter's in jail and lets him out. And Peter follows the angel out of the jail, and at first he thinks he's dreaming. He doesn't think he's really been freed, but then the angel disappears, and Peter really is on the street. And he knows, I don't want to stay out on the street too long, because they're eventually going to discover I'm missing, and they're going to come looking for me. So he needs to get hidden, and he goes to the house of John Mark's mother in Jerusalem. And they're having a prayer meeting in the house of John Mark's mother. They're praying for Peter because everybody knows he's in jail. He's going to be executed. So they're praying for him. So Peter shows up at the door and he starts knocking on the door. And a servant girl named Rhoda, no relation to the Mary Tyler Moore Show, a servant girl named Rhoda comes to the door and sees it's Peter. And she's so startled and overwhelmed and excited, she runs back in to tell everybody it's Peter. But there's more to this story, and we'll tell it on the other side of the break.
Oh, sometimes I love cliffhangers, sometimes I don't. I guess we'll have to wait 5 minutes if you want the rest of that answer from the question of King Tardigrade. Jimmy, this hour just went by way too fast. Let's do another.
Okay.
All right. So we
got to finish that story.
That's true. We do. We can't just leave them hanging. All right. We come back. More weird questions with Jimmy Akin right here on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano filling in for Cy Kelda today. It's great to be with you on this Friday. It's weird questions, if you didn't already tell by the weird music, fun weird music. Jimmy is in the middle of answering King Tardigrade's question. He had a question about bilocation and if bilocation is cloning, time travel, or doppelgängering. And Jimmy, you were in the middle of answering a few of those questions.
Yeah, so the specific option I was exploring at the moment was, could it be something like an angel appearing in your place? And I was mentioning that this interpretation actually has some traction in biblical studies, and I was recounting an incident from Acts chapter 12 where Herod Agrippa I was going to kill Peter, but an angel busts him out of jail. And when you've been busted out of jail, the first thing you need to do is get out of Dodge as quick as possible because the sheriff's going to come after you. And so what Peter does is he goes to the house of John Mark's mother, and what he's really going to do is just stop in and tell the local Christian community, I'm going elsewhere. I've got out of jail and now I'm going to go elsewhere. But when he starts knocking on the door, this servant girl named Rhoda comes to the door, and she's so excited to see Peter that she runs back into the back room where they're having a prayer meeting for him because they all know he's been arrested and is going to be executed. So they're all in the back room praying for him. She runs back into the back room and is saying, it's Peter, he's at the door, he's at the door. And they don't believe her. And she just keeps insisting. And so they think of an explanation and they say, oh, it's his angel. And then Peter comes in and says, actually, guys, no, it's me in the flesh, and I've been busted out of jail, and I'm getting out of town now. The interesting thing for our purposes is, why do they say it's his angel? Well, if you read scholarly biblical commentaries on the book of Acts, a common proposal is that it's because this is the proposal that people, or at least some people in ancient Israel, thought that your guardian angel looks like you, or at least could look like you. They could take your form or something. So since they believe Peter is off in jail and is unlikely to get out, they interpret the appearance of Peter at the door as being, oh, it's his guardian angel appearing in his form. And so that would essentially be what King Tardigrade is proposing as a possibility of, could an angel take the form of a person and appear in their place? Could that be what's going on in cases of bilocation? Well, what I can say is I don't see a reason an angel couldn't do it. And here in Acts 12, we have at least some evidence that an angel might do it. Now, I don't know that I consider the explanation I just mentioned to be definitive, but it has been proposed, and it does strike me as a plausible explanation. However, there are other phenomena that generate the appearance of bilocation, and the angelic explanation doesn't cover all of them. For example, the 20th century saint, who is now officially called Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, but who to me will forever be known as Saint Padre Pio, he was well known for his bilocations, and the angelic explanation doesn't cover his experience. He would reportedly, he was a cloistered monk, so he'd be in his monastery. I've actually been to his monastery. I've been at Mass where he celebrated Mass. I've been back in his room and seen his room and everything. But he would reportedly be in his monastery, and he would kind of become quiet. I don't know if he'd close his eyes or not, but he would become quiet, and then he would have experiences of a distant location. And this is a paranormal ability known as clairvoyance. It's sometimes called remote viewing. but it's basically clairvoyance, and it could be done, by God directly. It could be done by God using abilities that God had planted in human nature, so Padre Pio would have them. There's no real way to pull those apart and figure out the exact causation here, but Padre Pio would kind of go into a trance, or at least get quiet and not interact with his immediate environment in the monastery. And he would then have experiences perceiving a distant place. And other people at that location would experience him being there. So, for example, in one case, he was bilocating, and he had the experience of being at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And while he was having this experience, a young woman wanted to go to confession, who was at St. Peter's Basilica, wanted to go to confession. She grabs this priest and says, "Can you hear my confession?" And he says, "Sure." And he hears this woman's confession. And then months later, she visits the monastery. And she's like, "You were the guy who heard my confession." He's like, "Yep, I'm the guy who heard your confession down at St. Peter's." So this is what's known in parapsychology as an apparition of the living. So something is an apparition if it appears somewhere. Padre Pio appeared in St. Peter's Basilica, so it's an apparition, but he ain't dead. He's alive at this point, so it's an apparition of the living, and this is a well-known phenomenon. So what's the explanation here? Well, we don't have any evidence of angelic involvement. He doesn't mention, "Oh, and my guardian angel took my place," or anything like that. This is just, he's having this experience. And so the way that apparitions of the living are conventionally understood, at least in parapsychological terms, is they're basically two forms of ESP involved: telepathy and clairvoyance. The telepathy allows the person at the location to perceive you, because they're in telepathic contact with you. So that's how the woman in St. Peter's Basilica perceived Padre Pio being with her. That was a telepathic impression on her, because he's not physically here. And clairvoyance is also involved, because that's how Padre Pio is able to perceive her and what's going on in St. Peter's Basilica. So it looks like a combination of telepathy and clairvoyance, and that would seem to be something that God allows to happen in many cases of bilocation, particularly with saints. But there are other possibilities as well. So check out episode 212 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World for more.
Well, there you have it, King Tardigrade. Hopefully that's helpful. I certainly hope it was helpful to you, because it was for me. And with that, we go to our first break of the hour, and we come back with more weird questions right here on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
St. Carlo Acutis shared a dream in which Sister Lucia appeared to him, saying the first Saturday devotion could change the destiny of the world. The Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima invites you to practice this devotion. Join a First Saturday virtual pilgrimage beginning December 6th. Experience spiritual meditations while traveling virtually through Portugal and Spain to 12 sacred sites tied to the Fatima story. Track your journey with a passport and stamps. Visit bluearmy.com and select First Saturday Pilgrimage to learn more. Sponsored by Our Lady's Blue Army.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with a gospel message. You can enjoy EWTN live TV and radio streams, EWTN news, program schedules, prayers, and devotionals with the EWTN app. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. There's two things that every Catholic needs in his or her bookshelf: a Bible and a catechism. And the good news is, today through Sunday, you can go to shop.catholic.com. All Bibles and catechisms are 25% off when you use the promo code MUSTHAVE. That's one word, MUSTHAVE, at checkout. So order them today to arrive in time for Christmas. That's shop.catholic.com to get yourself a Bible or a catechism at 25% off when you use the promo code MUSTHAVE. This is a lot of fun, Jimmy, and we're going to keep on going. Let's go to Lord Wife. It says, my 8-year-old son, I'm already butchering this.
Yeah, it could be a daughter.
That's true.
Lord Wife doesn't say.
That's right. My 8-year-old wants to know why we don't have memories from when we are babies.
Okay, so I'm going to try to explain this as without using big words as much as I can, but if I slip, I'll trust Lord Wife to translate into terms that your 8-year-old may be more familiar with. Humans have different types of memory. When we remember stories about what has happened to us, like let's say yesterday you went to the grocery store and you bought milk. Well, okay, you remember that happening. That's a story about what happened to you yesterday. You went to the grocery store and you bought milk. That is a type of memory, and this is a fancy term, but that is called an episodic memory. It's an episode from your life. Although, to help out, you'll notice I just said stories about things that have happened to us. There are other types of memories too. Not all of our memory is episodic. Not all of our memories are about stories. We, for example, know how to speak English. I know what the word store means, and I know what the word milk means. But merely because I know what those two words mean, I don't have a story. I don't remember even when I learned them. So this is a different type of memory than the episodic memory or story-based memory that we normally think of. So, Lord Wife, my suspicion is when your 8-year-old asks, why don't we have memories from when we're babies, that the 8-year-old means episodic memory, or why don't we remember the stories of what happened to us when we were babies? So that's how I'm going to proceed in answering it. Well, there's a debate. One reason may be that before a certain age, we don't have the ability to form memories of events like that, of stories of what happened to us, because our ability to form memories does change as we grow and develop and get older. In particular, there's a part of the brain, it's called the hippocampus, that is involved in memory formation. And the hippocampus, like other parts of our brain, grows and develops over time. It's, like when we were all zygotes or single-celled organisms in our mother's womb. When we were just one cell, we didn't even have a brain. And so obviously all of the different parts of our brain that we use today had to grow and develop after that. And so they go through different stages of growth. And it's very possible that before a certain age, we don't yet have the parts of our brain developed enough to be able to form memories. And for a long time, people would say, oh, well, that's why babies can't remember. That's why we can't remember what happened to us when we were babies. We just didn't have the parts of our brain developed enough to be able to store memories. But there's reason to question that. One reason to question it is there have been some recent studies that suggests that children under 1 year old may be able to form memories. And you might wonder, well, how could you know? I mean, you can't ask a baby what happened yesterday. And even if you could, and the baby could reply, it's going to be pretty much the same from one day to another. Well, I woke up, I cried, I had a bottle of breast milk, and then I fell asleep, and then I woke up again and cried. You know, it's going to be the same stuff. But because babies can't talk, for a long time, people didn't know how to do scientific studies to find out if babies can form memories. But that has been partially solved. Because one of the things that scientists have discovered is if babies are familiar with something, they stare at it longer. And so even though you can't ask a baby, do you remember this? You can show the baby something. And if the baby remembers it and it's brand new, they've never seen it before, they won't stare at it as long as if they have seen it before and remember it. And so in the last few years, they've been doing these staring studies with children from like 4 months old up to, say 2 years old. And they found that children before 12 months are able to remember, oh yeah, I've seen that picture before, at least as evidenced by the fact they will stare at pictures they have been exposed to longer than they will stare at pictures they have not been exposed to. So that gives us evidence that they remember them. Now, it doesn't mean that they remember them the way we do, but we do have some evidence for memory formation in children under a year old. And that memory probably, the ability to remember probably develops it and really gets good by the time they're 3 or 4 years old. But we do have some evidence for memory formation in very small children. But they still don't remember a lot. And so even if we set aside, even if there is an age where they just can't form memories, there's another factor, and I'm going to have to use a technical term here, but it's called infantile amnesia. Amnesia is where you can't remember something, and infantile means when you're an infant. And so we experience infantile amnesia that seems to block out early memories that we formed when we were very small. And the probable reason for this form of amnesia is because our brain is growing and we're building new, I'm really trying to avoid technical terms, but basically our brains are made up of these little nerves called neurons, and as our brains grow, we create new neurons, and they can disrupt the old neurons that we used to have, and that appears to be part of what's responsible for infantile amnesia. There's also another form of amnesia that's a natural part of human growth. This is what's known as childhood amnesia. So childhood amnesia is from when you can't remember things, not from when you were a baby, but from later in your childhood. So most people, like I have a very dim memory from when I was 4 years old, but it's very dim. And a lot of people, they can't remember things from when they were 4 years old or 5 years old or 6 years old or things like that once they're adults. And that's because of childhood amnesia. Well, childhood amnesia seems to be the same kind of thing. As our brains grow, the new structures in our brains disrupt the older structures that were there before. And childhood amnesia tends to set in around age 7. So your 8-year-old is probably already starting to not remember some things from when your 8-year-old was 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And as an adult, probably won't be able to remember all that stuff. But Good news, if there's something that your 8-year-old would like to remember as an adult, think about it now and think about it often to reinforce that memory so that it will survive the childhood amnesia that your 8-year-old is experiencing. And if the child completely forgets it, well, you won't miss it. So, most adults are not burdened by the fact that we don't have a lot of memories from when we were 4 or 5 or something like that. We go through life just fine. It'll be fine. And it's good that we actually have childhood memory because it enables our brains to grow and mature and do the more powerful brain work that we'll need to do as adults. So it appears that with infantile amnesia and childhood amnesia, they actually are important stages in growth and development. And yeah, it would be cool to be able to remember more things, but actually it's a good thing that we don't remember everything. In fact, there is a condition, and I have to use a fancy word for it, but it's called highly superior autobiographical memory. And people who have highly superior autobiographical memory, there's not very many of them. The actress Mary Lou Henner is one of them. But people who have highly superior autobiographical memory, they really can remember tons of stuff. Not everything, but tons of stuff. You could say, where were you on March 7th, 1980? Mary Lou Henner would be able to say, oh, I was on the set of Taxi that day, the TV show I was on. Okay, she can do that, but there are problems if you remember absolutely everything, because you not only remember the good stuff that's happened to you, you remember the bad stuff. And there are things that it's better to just not have to be burdened by remembering that. I mean, and actually, when you were a kid and felt helpless as a baby and were crying and in anguish and everything, that's probably one of those things you wouldn't want to keep remembering all the time. So there are benefits to not remembering everything. And the reason why we don't remember from events from when we were babies is probably a combination of things, including not being able to form memories for a while, and then having infantile amnesia, and then having childhood amnesia. But these are all important stages of growth that help set us up to be healthy, successful adults that have really strong brain power.
All right. That was, I got to give you kudos. That was great great answer for an 8-year-old child. That's fantastic.
Well,
there's a couple of words you threw in there, but that's actually pretty impressive, especially for a very long answer like that.
Yeah, well, I try to do what I can, but I'm confident that Lord Wife will be able to translate in case I used any words that the 8-year-old may not know.
There you go.
But I want to compliment the 8-year-old for thinking about this question, because it's a very interesting question, and a lot of people don't think about it.
Yeah, I always thought that there were no more studies about it. Yeah, it's just something you don't think about. Why would you look into the memory of a child when it looks like they really don't have any? But it makes sense because they're going to constantly they remember people, they remember things, they remember their favorite toys. So by the time they actually start having memory or start being more conscious, they're already aware of all these things. Yeah. Well, before we go to the hard break here, I wanted to ask you, because it's been already an hour and a half and I haven't asked you. Today's Friday, so Mysterious World came out. So what's today's episode?
Yeah, so today is a patrons questions episode. While I was over in Italy, we did a couple of Q&A sessions for the patrons who went with us. And so you'll see a video of me and my co-host Don Bettinelli over in Italy in one of those sessions answering their questions. Among other things, we answer questions about the Eye of Providence and where it comes from. That's the symbol you see on the